Good evening, everyone. I'm Sumita Singha. I'm on the RIBA Council and also on the RIBA Board. So on behalf of the Royal Institute of British Architects, I welcome you all to 66 Portland Place and the 2023 RIBA Stirling and the Stephen Lawrence Prize Winners Talk. We have a wonderful, insightful evening planned for you. For me, as an architect and educator, this evening is particularly special as we bring together for the first time two award winners who represent excellence in the profession and also educators themselves. I'm absolutely delighted to see so many people here, particularly young people, because there's a unique chance to hear from architects as they tell their stories behind their award-winning buildings. The RIBA Stirling Prize was first awarded in 1996 and is named after James Stirling, the great British architect. The aim then was that it would be for architecture what the Booker Prize was for literature, and today it's one of the most prestigious awards of its kind in the world. Maybe some of you did watch the screening of it in Manchester, and it's looked at by bookies and on the television. Everyone's excited about it. The prize is awarded to architects and clients of the building which has made the greatest contribution to the evolution of architecture in the past year. This year's winner of this prestigious prize is the Morden Centre by May Architects, who we welcome warmly here. Tonight's proceedings are also special because in celebration of the 25th year of the Stephen Lawrence Prize, today we bring two RIBA Prize winners together. The Stephen Lawrence Prize was founded in 1998 by Baroness Doreen Lawrence, who I've actually worked with, and Marco Goldschmidt, in memory of the aspiring architect Stephen Lawrence, who was murdered before he could fulfill his dreams. The prize celebrates new architectural talent awarded to a project led by an early career architect. This evening, I'm delighted to welcome the 2023 Stephen Lawrence Prize winner, Conrad Koslowsky Architects for Lighthouse Children's Home. Welcome. To just give a brief outline of the program for this evening, the two winners will present their buildings in a short Pecha style presentations. Those of you who are students will remember that. And we will then enjoy hearing a more in-depth conversation between the speakers, myself, and the RIBA Journal editor, Eleanor Young. There'll be an opportunity for audience questions, and this will be done on the platform Metimeter. Before we begin, I'd like to extend our thanks to this evening's sponsor, Autodesk, without whom events like this would not be possible. Autodesk's continued support is greatly appreciated. I would like to now hand over to Marek Suchocki, Head of Industry Association Strategy at Autodesk, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumita. It's wonderful to be able to open this evening's session on behalf of my employer, Autodesk, where we were delighted to take the opportunity to be first-time sponsors of such a globally significant industry award as the Stirling Prize. So may I start by warmly congratulating the worthy winners, the Morden Centre by May for the RIBA Stirling Prize 2023, and the Lighthouse Children's Home by Conrad Koslowsky Architects for the Stephen Lawrence Prize. I had the personal honour of being one of the jury members for the Stirling Prize, and I was also the only chartered engineer amongst the panel. We visited the 6 shortlisted buildings over a 3-day period in September, and we finished with the deliberation that took us nearly 4 hours here at RIBA. That long discussion perhaps best reflects the quality and variation of the shortlisted buildings, where we considered each submission on its individual merits and no single project became a de facto choice. During the visits, we had the chance to experience the buildings and, of course, admire their physical quality, but more importantly, had the opportunity to speak to the architects, clients, other project participants, and in many cases, the users. These conversations allowed us to appreciate the considerable effort taken to plan, design, and construct the delivered facilities, but also understand how they were performing in use. The shortlist this year, along with the winner of the Stephen Lawrence Prize, demonstrated the importance of considered design that endeavours to best serve the needs of its audience, whilst also ensuring the project can be delivered with maximised sustainability outcomes within its cost, time and quality constraints. Unintended consequences seem to be a common symptom of progress. Industrialisation is a key factor for our environmental challenges. Economic improvement creates disparities within society. Universal education can leave many behind or reduce attractiveness of traditional or manual roles. And decades of amazing advances in healthcare have resulted in an ever-aging population where many must live with long-term health issues. At Autodesk, our focus is to provide numerous technology investments and services to help our customers design and make a better world. We will shortly hear from our prize winners, whose projects, I believe, reflect a similar sentiment and should be celebrated for tackling many of the alluded to unintended consequences by instead considering anticipated consequences and providing solutions that subsequently deliver best desired outcomes to their stakeholders now and hopefully in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Marek. I've got the pleasure in a moment of inviting our winners onto stage to present their schemes. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about them as individuals. First will be Alex Ely, Founding Director of May, who will present the Stirling Prize winner, as you know, the John Morden Centre. The quality of the practice's work has been recognised in numerous awards, including a shortlisting for the Stirling Prize in 2022, as well as winning the Stirling Prize this year. He also advises the government and the Mayor of London on urban and planning policy, which has probably affected many of you in a positive way. He's also recently published Towards a Resilient Architecture, looking at kind of more inclusive and environmentally conscientious buildings and places, which I think we can see in the John Morden Centre. I'm also pleased to welcome Conrad, winner of the Stephen Lawrence Prize 2023. I feel like I'm repeating myself slightly or repeating others. This is the first time, though, that a person, an early career project architect, has defined the eligibility of a project for a prize. So it's not about the size of the building, it's really about having an earlier career architect as project architect. However, Conrad was more than that. He was project architect, project director, project manager, I think it would be fair to say, with a very close relationship through the contract, as you'll hear, from checking site feasibilities to overseeing the build. He studied at the AA, and the reason for telling you that is it just shows he's been kind of stellar right from the start. So he had the nomination for the prestigious President's Medals. More recently, he was in the 2021 cohort for the RIBA journal Rising Stars. And he also teaches on the M-Arch at the University of Cambridge. So, two fascinating projects, two interesting architects with an intellectual and pragmatic hinterland that I think we can enjoy exploring. Do come up with your own questions, as Sumita mentioned. I think you should have the link in your confirmation email, but we will also take questions in this format. We're going to actually start with a film of the John Morden Centre. So settle back and enjoy the show, and Alex will be up straight after that.
The John Morden Centre is a wonderful day facility for the residents of Morden College to come together and thrive. It offers a health centre, arts rooms, cafe, a theatre space, and it's really intended as the hub of community life at the college. Morden College was built in 1695 to cater for those in later life. Our client, David Rutherford-Jones, had this vision to create a building that could become the centre of community life, that could uplift the spirits of residents, but also be a place of coming together. We know that in later life, some of the biggest challenges are isolation and loneliness. John Morden Centre is very much about creating a space where residents can connect.
I come up and do knitting. I didn't really come out as much as I do now, but when this was finished, I come here, yes. It's a nice place to come.
So the design brief was to produce a building that would truly, in every respect, add value to the quality of life of the older people who live with us. A building can be much more than the sort of functionality that it gives an organisation or a person. Actually, the building itself is a therapy in a sense and lifts people's spirits.
The main quad, it's the most beautiful classic almshouse, colonnade at ground floor, lovely brick architecture, pitch roofs, animated by chimneys on the skyline. And the John Morden Centre very much follows some of those ideas. At the heart of it is a cloister that runs the length of the centre, off which hang a series of pavilions that serve different functions. So one pavilion is the health centre, another a snug and a lounge. We've got the arts room, we've got the cafe, and then the cloister terminates with Morden Hall, which is a theatre space for many different activities. We wanted to create a very low carbon building. The main superstructure is built with cross-laminated timber, which reduces waste and sequesters carbon. So by its very nature, it's a low carbon building. The pavilions themselves are then clad in a wonderful red brick which echoes and harmonises with the Grade 1 listed almshouse that it sits alongside. And then you see features like the chimneys, and these act as natural vents. So the building's naturally lit, the chimneys provide natural ventilation through stack effects. The residents who use the building have a range of abilities and disabilities. It's level thresholds throughout. The mullions for the windows have handrails built into them. As you come down the cloister, there's seating along the way where you could take a rest with simple armrests that help you easily get up and out of the chair. The site already had a rich landscape setting. We've got this wonderful cedar tree which the whole building was designed around. It means that you're always aware of nature. There's constant views out to the landscape.
I'm so happy walking here in the morning. I suddenly realise and think to myself, I'm so happy. I love it.
The cafe, I just think, is outrageously beautiful. The whole of one wall is glass. So you can be in the cafe watching the art going on, or you can be concentrating on your art but seeing the world outside.
It's absolutely lovely sitting here, and if you look at the window up there you can see the trees and the birds, and it's a delightful place to sit and enjoy.
I would describe it as a place that has a sense of hope about it. It's not just about the functionality, it's about going in there and just feeling better by the time you leave.
It's really remarkable how a 3-minute film can tell the whole story of this project, and I feel like I've got nothing further to add. So first off, thanks Sumita, Marek and Eleanor for your introductions. I think that film really does convey the kind of wonder and appeal of the John Morden Centre. And it's not just appeal for us as architects, but actually as evidently shown by the residents. And if I have the quality of life that Fred has, who is featured in that film when I'm his age, I'll die very happy. So in the time I've got, you will learn much more about the project and our involvement, our ideas behind it during the conversation, and I think that's the main structure for this evening. So I'm going to be quite brief. I'll sort of try and reveal a bit more than perhaps the film conveyed about the actual layouts and some of the design. This aerial view shows the context of the John Morden Centre. Morden College is this wonderful almshouse in a campus grounds on the edge of Blackheath. It's quite sort of self-contained, and you get a sense of the rich landscape that surrounds the original Grade 1 listed Christopher Wren building on the right hand of this image. But over time, the college has built residence or accommodation for 300 residents whose needs are very varying from those who live quite independently in their later life. They're all in financial hardship. They've all had to be appraised to be offered a place here. But then there are also those residents who need round-the-clock care. And the client recognised that there was lacking in the campus a space that could become the real heart of the community. And he found this rather unprepossessing site for us at the edge of the campus, a car park, some porta cabins, what became Morden Hall here, a little octagonal building that we retained and refurbished. But then this kind of sense of wonder of kind of mature trees and this beautiful cedar tree. So this was our site. So it didn't lend itself to something of the coherence and legibility of the quadrangle. But nonetheless, we were drawn to the ideas that Christopher Wren revealed in his architecture. So I'll use my time just to talk through some plans and a couple of details. This is the figure ground plan or nollie plan, and we've got the quadrangle. And I think what's interesting about this is you've got the cloister that you saw in the film, a very rigid piece of geometry, but then you've got the chapel and an old dining hall and the master's hall that hangs off this. So they're almost like these parasites that hang off the master building. And our proposition very much followed that same principle. So we start with the cloister, and it's an unfolded version of the colonnade that you saw in the quadrangle. It's much more dynamic because rather than inward facing, it connects with the landscape and nature, and views are revealed as you move through it. So you come in, there's a threshold, a little garden, and you're always moving from indoors to out. So this feels like a garden wall. You step off the main thoroughfare and the connection from the campus up here. You come into a lobby, and then as you come through here, you see to another landscape space. Or as you come through here, you see to the mature cedar tree. And the journey takes you past all the different functions of the building to the refurbished hall. So the functions of the building are very much housed in a series of pavilions, and they hang off that cloister. So we've got the health centre, which provides clinical services and GP allowance for GP services. You've got a lounge and reception for meeting visitors and guests, so family members will come and visit their aging relatives here. There's a little shop for provisions, an office, a nail bar, possibly the first Stirling Prize winning scheme with a nail bar, and hairdressers. And then we've got this kind of crafts room and arts room, which has become hugely popular. And what's really fascinating is that there was an anticipated need that the client articulated in his brief, but actually post-pandemic, post-lockdown, a lot of the residents are engaging with this facility in a way that they might not have before, and I think the film revealed that. And then the cafe here, and served by the kitchen, which is again a refurbished building, terminating in the Morden Hall, which has everything from, there was karaoke going on there last time I was there. There was an IT advisory club. They got school kids in to teach the residents life classes about IT, or actually it was the residents actually giving the students life classes. They do annual reviews that the residents put on. There's a choir. All sorts of things go on in there. And then, as I alluded to, there is these series of landscape gardens that, as you move through the building, you always kind of see and connect to. And then there are these views and layers out. And so it's not just framed views of a landscape, it's borrowed views of a landscape. So even when you're in the depth of the building, you're seeing across different spaces and into other spaces. And that helps the connection and the sense of community. And then the other two aspects that perhaps don't come across well enough in the film are the idea of it being a low embodied carbon building and low operationally carbon building. So low embodied carbon, it's entirely made out of CLT. That's left exposed. We're not adding superfluous finishes that only absorb or emit more carbon, use up more resource. So the CLT is left as an exposed and attractive finish, which makes it feel comfortable and humane and warm. And these are some of the simple, although each pavilion is different size, slightly different heights, they actually follow all the same DNA of these sort of semi-pyramid roof structures. And there you see the superstructure revealed under construction. So very simple to build, very quick to build, and then quite rawly left in its finishes. And then it's also low passively carbon, so it doesn't have expensive air conditioning, it's naturally ventilated, cross-ventilated, the chimneys provide stack effect, there's solar shading from the projections, there's a green roof on the colonnade that adds ecology and enriches the biodiversity. And on that note, I will conclude and hope to broaden your insight into the project through the discussion. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the introductions. It's very much appreciated. So I'll start by providing a little bit of context for those of you that don't know much about children's homes. The systemic inequalities of children's social care in the UK are fairly well documented. Care leavers tend to have poor educational outcomes, are 50 times more likely to end up in prison, and a third of care leavers are homeless within 2 years of leaving care. Many children's homes are private entities that tend to prioritize regulatory adherence or profit over the needs of vulnerable children. So, inspired by more successful European models, Emmanuel Akpen Inwang founded Lighthouse Pedagogy Trust, a charity guided by holistic relationship-based principles that acknowledges the profound impact a child's environment can have on their development and well-being. I was asked to help search for a suitable property for their first home, with the aim of designing and delivering a revolutionary new benchmark for the sector. Among the properties that we visited was this derelict former care home, abandoned due to the tragic neglect and abuse of its residents, and destined for the wrecking ball. With an attitude analogous to the purpose and ethos of the charity, we saw enormous potential for this unloved and neglected building and resisted its demolition despite the mold and rot. So a child-centered brief was developed through several meetings and workshops with the client to address the physical, social, and psychological space shared by the children and those who work and live with them. This project evolved through the design of a series of fragments and moments within the project that helped to shape the life space of the home. These moments, in turn, fall within 4 key kind of pillars or categories illustrated and annotated in this diagram. First and foremost, the house had to feel like a home, not an institution. Often without adequate resource, knowledge, or perhaps patience, the unique and complex requirements of children's homes are all too often dealt with in an ad hoc fashion. So just for context, this central picture is a chair that's set up for staff that are meant to stay overnight in the case that a particular child might be at risk of self-harm, as an example. So very, very much a kind of ad hocism in place. And in some cases, these homes succumb to a kind of carceral impulse. In this example, a kind of panopticon-esque office intended as a tool for surveillance that thankfully has been subverted by its care workers to shield the view outwards. I've seen projects in council briefing documents for ITTs where airlocks are encouraged as a way of controlling the children, just to highlight the level of kind of carcerality that exists in some of these projects. By contrast, we really wanted a home that was going to be warm and inviting, and we stubbornly challenged and rethought every regulatory detail. From the escape stairs through to the integrated fire equipment and signage, which meet the requirements without being overbearing. The soundscape also has been sensitively considered, and this is a home without the jingling of lots of keys on rings. The physical home is often an outlet for children in care as a proxy for their understandable angers and fears. As a result, we were determined that the materiality of the home should withstand abuse without looking institutional, while also being tactile, warm and playful. The ambition is also to break the cycle of disposable laminate, plastic replacements and revolving maintenance that's common in care homes, and that the materials used should instead improve with use and age or be easily repairable. For example, lime plaster is far tougher than gypsum. Solid oak is used throughout. Doors are designed to withstand kicks and charges. New floors have thick solid wearing layers. And similar criteria were used for selecting fittings and furnishings throughout, including for a dining table that we were lucky enough to design for the home. So other details encourage learning, play, and participation in the home. We tried to invoke a kind of curiosity through interactive surfaces like movable dividers and chalkboards, and through materials like fossil-rich limestone. We introduced vibrant color throughout the home without being infantilizing. That's while it's still in construction. A third group of details falls under the heading of negotiation, relations, and renewal, whereby we strove to provide adaptable and diverse spaces to facilitate the complex and unpredictable relationships of the home. So deep thresholds and liminal spaces help to establish layers of privacy, while several niches near communal areas create semi-social refuges with carefully choreographed vantage points across the home. Each shared living space has 2 routes out to counter a sense of entrapment for children that are accustomed otherwise to abuse and bullying. And bedrooms are designed with several furniture layouts in mind to facilitate a sense of agency and choice. Where an office door is typically a symbol of authority and a predictable flashpoint, we provided a soft and welcoming counterpoint to help diffuse these tensions. There was a principle of reuse, a fabric-first approach. We tried to work with the existing building as much as possible, using natural building materials and infrared heating and the like. I will get into it. I just want to skip ahead to the fact that a project like this has never really been attempted in the UK. We fought hard to challenge institutionalizing forces. Every element of the house is designed to create a place where children feel safe and can be proud to call home. The project has given me a renewed faith in the reach that architecture can have if supported by the right client. And of course, none of this would have been possible without Emmanuel's extraordinary vision and mission, and so I want to thank him very much, along with the project team, who I believe is here today. So huge thank you to you and to my team, and for your friendship. So yes, thank you for listening, and I'll leave it there, because that's already too long.
And thanks, Alex and Conrad. Fascinating presentations. I'm sorry they were short, but yes, we're hoping to cover a lot of those issues now, with your help, I hope. We've kind of got a rough schema of what we're hoping to cover, and let's see how we get through it. The prizes themselves, of course, that needs to be talked about. We're going to have a little look at clients and user engagement. We want to touch on sustainability, on materials, on details, the build. Oh my goodness, this is already sounding too much. And then the bigger questions beyond the projects. So what we can take from them in terms of skills and education, and maybe advice from them, and what is next for architecture. Alex has already taken me to task for what is next in architecture as a bit of a big question. But anyway.
We could just use that for the whole evening.
We've obviously got some of your questions through Mentimeter, and we'll work them in. Also, if you have questions, do let us know. I'll kind of look to you every now and then. First of all, I want to find out who's in the audience. Could you put your hands up? Architects or architects in training? Vast majority, which is likely at the RIBA. Okay, other construction professionals? Excellent. Those who are just sort of architecturally interested? Yeah, great. Excellent. So, Conrad, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
Now you've had a chance to reflect on it. Obviously, we saw you in Manchester. You were accepting the prize in a huge room, massive party. You're like, oh my goodness, yes, I've got it, wow. But now you've had a chance to reflect on it. How does it feel to have won the Stephen Lawrence Prize?
Yeah, I mean, on the evening it was very surreal and unexpected, strangely. And I think I'm still processing and figuring out how to make sure that it doesn't just end there, that there's a kind of utility and that it can be a way to generate further conversation, to draw more attention to the project and, in many ways to the mission that the client, that Emmanuel is undertaking. And yeah, partly also just to raise awareness for a sector that's been, very neglected in terms of the built environment.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
One of the questions submitted was, does anyone want to take this one? Does anyone want to own up to this one? The impact of winning the prize on the project. No, I will just read that out. How do you think winning the prize will impact future practice for you? Can you tell?
It's early days, so it's really difficult to tell at the moment. Again, I think these things, they can collect dust and not be very useful if you don't make use of them, and if you don't try to, create more conversation as a result of the prize. So that's really the intention. I can't say that I've had any inquiries for work, if that's what you mean. But again, there have been some interesting, meetings that have been set up on the back of it, and so yeah, it definitely, I'm hugely grateful for the opportunities that it's already kind of unlocking that that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So. Yeah,
and Alex, the Stirling Prize, it's a biggie, but you've been close to it before. I mean, does it make any difference? I saw you on telly and stuff.
So did my mum and dad.
Hooray!
Yeah, that was the highlight of their year. Does it make a difference? There are a number of sort of aspects to it. First off, it's the morale given to the team, not just at May, but also to our wider consultant team, I think is enormous, especially when, frankly, this year has been really difficult for many in our industry. The sort of lack of progress on public sector commissioning, which is the large part of our work, I think suddenly to get this recognition is real validation for the sort of purpose and mission of our practice. So you alluded, or you referenced in your introduction to me, that not only personally do I get involved in more civil society type issues of working with government and the mayor, but actually as a practice, we are wholly focused on affordable housing, social infrastructure, and it's a difficult time for those sectors. So I think that's not to say this is going to suddenly turn into kind of work opportunities, but I think just to give a morale boost to the team is really wonderful. And it certainly sort of validates, for me, our position as a practice.
There's a great question on the system, Mentimeter. There are two very different user groups. I think that's between the two of you. Did either get the chance to engage with the build or later design stages? I'm guessing whoever asked that question, do you want to own up? Isn't talking about physically building the project. Alex, could you just kick us off on that? Was there a chance to get involved with the build or later design stages for the users?
So not so much in the build, but certainly during the design development, we consulted closely. Our client, the chief exec of Morden College, David Rutherford-Jones, had a very clear idea of what he wanted to achieve in the building. He'd looked at the Maggie Centres and been inspired by those, so he had a very high bar. But also he really understood what the college was short of for its residents. That said, and I think the sort of film revealed this, they're a very particular, they're a very engaging and very intelligent and very active group of residents, and people like Fred, who you saw in the film, is a very talented artist, and he wanted a particular space which we were able to accommodate in our design. Something like the craft room, actually we hadn't quite anticipated the level of demand, and it's almost a victim of its own success now. So there may be a need to expand that possibly. So you can consult, but I guess you still need to try and future-proof or accept that once a building is built, then it will really come into its own, and it'll know whether it's hit the right button in terms of its brief, whether that's from the client or the residents.
Sumita, you have a question about this. Maybe you want to address it first to Conrad.
Yes, so user engagement is really important in both of your projects, and particularly with yourself, Conrad, whereas children are involved. How did you actually get them engaged at the beginning of the project when you were formulating the brief? So it's sort of going back to how you started.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's obviously an enormous amount of kind of safeguarding around, conversations that you have with children in care. But we were lucky enough to be shown around several homes with the client as we were developing a brief, which was a process that kind of was, that we undertook for a very long time. But visiting those homes and being shown around in some cases by the children, who were very proud of their homes, that they were living in was a really wonderful insight into some of the issues that come up in homes and some of the kind of demands that are placed on these homes. They're very, very unique environments with all sorts of complexities. And but of course it's also the staff. They're as much the users as the children. Of course, the children are at the center of the brief, but the staff are also incredibly important. So hearing their viewpoints, the things that work and that don't, was incredibly, it was indispensable information.
It's a creative process.
Yeah, and so no, I mean, also you don't know what the charity has no idea who the children are before they come to the home, and so as anyone that has been around teenagers knows that there are lots of different personalities. And so it is difficult in that sense to predict. But yeah, we did spend time with children in care, and as much as we could, kind of pick their brains and try to understand what they were after.
I noticed we've got another question on clients from the system, from you guys. So about clients and describing how they might feel going through the journey. Anyone want to own up to that one? I'm just giving you the opportunity, but I'm happy to read them out. Conrad, could you describe what you want your clients, the users really, to feel as they're in the home that you've created?
I mean, mostly I just want them to feel like they're in a home, that it's quite simple in that respect, and to feel safe, and to feel that they don't. That they're not in a kind of institutional setting, that they're not being oppressed by a kind of architecture that's there to contain them. That's So I think that's the main thing.
Yeah.
I think so much of what we did actually just comes down to a lot of foundational principles in architecture to begin with.
What, the space light stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that we already kind of care about, and that comes through in a lot of what many schools are teaching students to do in architecture. That then is a natural kind of outpouring into a project of this nature.
But you have to fight to make sure it comes in rather than the laminates and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a sensation? I feel like you might want people to feel joy in your project, or is it something more pedestrian?
Oh no, that's top of the agenda. I mean, our strapline as practice is about creating work that uplifts the human spirit, and I mean that can sound very glib, but I suppose we try and ensure that there's depth behind that sort of mission statement, that actually how we think about space, how we think about landscape, how we think about sort of program, how we think about materiality and the haptic qualities of architecture is all about making you feel good in and around the buildings. I mean, I'm interested, the question sort of was specific about the client, and of course there are two clients. There's a client commissioning you, and there's a client for the building at the end of the day who are using it. And they go on two different journeys, I suppose. The client who's commissioning it, I think he's sort of told me that the project exceeded his expectations. Although he had been introduced to the Morden Centres and been to visit them, and that was the foundation of his brief to us. And he recognised that architecture can be inspiring and uplifting and improve quality of life and well-being. I think he certainly learnt through the conversations, through the collaboration with us, how you can achieve that in architecture. And then the residents, I suppose, were looking at it from a slightly different perspective. They were looking at it not necessarily of what a building can achieve, but what's affecting their lives currently or before the John Morden Centre. So the fact that they were able to articulate the fact that they didn't get out much or felt lonely in instances or weren't engaging in activities that they might have wished for. And that became even more evident during lockdown and the pandemic. And actually, I think the sort of consequence of the lockdown is that more residents are actually using the centre than perhaps would have done if there hadn't been.
Yes, actually, this question about joy that you brought up made me think that both of your buildings have been described as warm and therapeutic. There's some kind of healing associated with being in those buildings. And earlier on, Alex, you mentioned that you do a lot of work in the public sector. So how do you bring those elements, and this is a question for both of you really, how do you bring those elements into architecture?
Yeah, that's a lovely question, because I get this from two angles. One, so some of you might know I've been involved in policy development and wrote the Mayor of London's housing design guidance. And that often comes in under criticism for limiting design opportunity and reducing everything down to metrics and minima. But actually, we've never found it a barrier in our housing work to deliver really innovative, creative, unusual spaces. And for me, the standards and policy work is about setting a benchmark that we don't fall below and raising the bar to above the unacceptable. So we find, even on tight budgets that local authorities have, or in this case, Morden College is a well-endowed, financially well-endowed charity, but it has to be very careful with its money. It has a very scrupulous group of trustees who watch over it and advise it. And so we had to be diligent with both the brief and the finances, and try and make sure that you get your bang for your buck and really get the most kind of quality of space. And that's why I mentioned the sort of leanness of the architecture. It doesn't rely on superfluous finishes and expense to make it uplifting and joyful.
And how would you bring that, Conrad?
I mean, I would caveat anything that I would say by first saying that without the right staff, without the intent, without the client, without the mission, it kind of is meaningless in a way. You have to have that, of course, but where architecture can, where we do have agency, I think, I mean, it doesn't have to cost the world. It's many of the moments that the kind of elements that I was talking about that were integrated into the design of the home were very affordable, and I think it's a case of where that you can carefully use a limited budget in a way that doesn't detract from a brief. So
we talked about budgets. That's one of the big constraints. I think somebody here has got a question about constraints. Do you want to say it? Oh, please say it. No. What were the biggest project constraints for both projects, Alex?
Well, a huge centenary cedar tree was one of them.
Oh, but I thought that was one of the best things about it.
Exactly. So that's how you turn a constraint into an opportunity.
With a TPO, or just one that everybody loved? Or just one that was obvious?
I don't actually know whether it was TPOs. We loved it, yeah.
Right.
And why would you not want to put it at the heart of the project? But of course it pushed the building right up against the boundary fence. It meant in that space we could only accommodate, I think, 2 meters deep depth of accommodation. It meant that we had to come up with a clever floating slab structure to allow the root ball to work underneath it. But it absolutely makes that space wonderful. And the focus of, as you saw from the plan, the sort of cloister wrapping around that means actually the tree is the centre of attention spatially, which I think is wonderful.
How long has it got left in it, that tree? Thanks.
Yeah, good question. Well,
there was until it.
There was, I think, a fair bit of fear on the part of, certainly on the client's part, that it might not even last the construction, but more because of the disruption. I don't know. I hope for a long time.
So, just a follow-on question from the floor. Were there any compromises you had to make because of constraints on the site? Any other compromises? I mean, you're next to a Wren building. Does that make a difference?
Yes, and possibly this might be
Almost.
for some an area of criticism of a project. You know, is it too conservative in its language or expression? Although other people have described it as brutal and you know, austere. I think for me the Wren building was a source of inspiration, and I hope that I got that across in my talk. And I suppose I'm not very imaginative, so if I can just look at something that's nearby and borrow some ideas from that, then all for the better.
That's it, you heard it here first. Stirling Prize winner, not imaginative. Conrad, remarkable hurdles. Thank you for the question, by the way. Any remarkable hurdles encountered when materialising the project, e.g. building control?
Oh, building control was a little bit difficult. We were lucky enough to have a fire engineer that was able to work with building control in a convincing way. And so we didn't have to, you know, fall down at a lot of the hurdles that might have been problematic. Of course, again, with a lot of stubbornness and persistence.
I mean, I don't remember a fire door at the base of the stairs, or there's no kind of obvious...
No, but this is the thing. People make assumptions about what's needed, and people make assumptions about what's encoded in an approved document as something that has to be applied in all cases. If you dig deeper and you push, then without compromising the safety, of course, some of these things can be dealt with differently, and so you find ways of approaching it from a different angle.
You had a really nice question around materials, Sumita.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of, when Alex was talking and now with your thing, it just sort of made me think about materials, because both of your projects, yours is a retrofit and yours uses timber quite a bit. And the first thing in client's mind is like, how do we get rid of all this eco-friendly material, because, you know, we are up against the budget. So with both of you had to persuade the client. I think maybe in your case it was easier, but yours was a completely new build with a CLT structure. I just, you know, could you just walk us through, because I think with the audience here, we'd all be interested in how you did it and learn from that.
I think the two aspects to that is, one is working to a budget, but actually let's start with the fact that in terms of the impact of our industry on the climate, we need to develop an architecture that is, as our book tries to talk about, responsive to that climate crisis, the climate crisis and the ecological crisis. We have to find a language that evolves out of that and isn't trying to do more than it needs to do, or rather prioritizes trying to keep its environmental impact low. So it makes it a lot easier to justify it. So my point about the lean construction, the fact that we haven't got plasterboard finishes, skirting boards, architraves, air conditioning, that saves you cost, which means that you can have a nice finish on the CLT, or actually if CLT is slightly more expensive than brick and block, you can find savings elsewhere. So there's always a trade-off. Last year, in last year's Stirling shortlisted scheme, we were using bricks made from waste, which was a really fascinating material, and increasingly I think we're going to have to be using upcycled, recycled, made from waste materials, more retrofit, as a means of reducing our exploitation of the planet's resources. Obviously at Morden College there was the sensitivity of the Grade 1 listed building, and the planning conversation is inevitably steers you towards a nice red brick that is appropriate for that setting. And but it was fairly economic, and it didn't. Achieving the environmental objectives wasn't. I wouldn't say that the cost wasn't a barrier, and equally it didn't create barriers in terms of cost. If you see what I mean.
So I think you were both pretty much in control of the FF&E, like the furniture. Is that right? You could just nod to that. It's not a long answer. No? Not entirely, but partly.
Some involvement.
Some involvement,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So there's a question from the floor about the table, which I know you were very closely involved in. And I want you to tell the story about the crack as well.
Oh yeah, you can't ignore the crack. So the table, we needed something that you can't really get off the shelf. So we needed a table that was incredibly heavy.
This is like a kitchen table where you'd sit around and eat.
Yeah. So if something, if a situation, if there was a kind of moment that kicked off and someone wanted to flip the table over, that would be very difficult to do. So there's something about the solidity that's just, that prevents that. But also to have something that fit the space, that could fit 10 people, but that was shaped in a way so that you could have people that want to sit close to each other at one end of the table, people that might want to sit further apart at one end of the table. So it was a kind of oblong shape. But then also these little moments of kind of delight and curiosity where we had the legs protruding through the top of the table so that you could see the finish. I mean, just things that architects like to do anyway. But it just adds that little bit of intrigue. The crack, though, very unfortunately, the furniture maker, who we worked very closely with, was missold some oak that had too much moisture in it, and so it moisture in it, and so it cracked. And it's now fixed and actually looks quite good.
Is it fixed with like a little gold fixing, like in kind of wabi-sabi?
More or less, yeah. Really? Kintsugi sort of approach. But no, it's actually I saw it just not that long ago in the summer, and it's looking nice and bedded in.
Easy to wipe clean.
Easy to wipe clean now, yeah.
It's part of retrofit as well, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
I think we've answered this last question to some extent. If there's anything to add, anything new, please do. Both buildings bring joy, support the users, and have been built with a limited budget. Thank you, whoever gave us this one. Why aren't all new buildings within the care sector as inspirational?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, you could just leave it at that, couldn't you? Very good question. I think it's a tragedy that they're not. And it's really revealing that it takes, in our case, a charity to create, in both cases, a charity to create these kind of amazing buildings, when arguably it'd be great if there were more state-provided facilities like these. John Morden Centre is quite an unusual building type, first of all. It's combining healthcare and sort of cultural and leisure spaces combined, which is quite an unusual brief. So it's not like another building type. It's not like a better version of another building type or buildings that are being regularly built. That said, it is a building type that could readily lend itself to being commissioned elsewhere by others.
Yeah. Matthew in the audience. Matthew, hi. Would you tell us your question, which I sort of think fits into this point, and maybe Conrad could answer it at the same time. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it was a comment by Catherine Slesser in Dezeen, who called the shortlist emblematic of good ordinary, which was, I suppose, designed as a comment on something she perceives as a shortlist that is of the time. Oh, that's the meaning I took from it anyway. And as chair of the jury for the Stephen Lawrence Prize, it was very much Conrad's project, which it was so good and ordinary, but it performs such a beautiful function. And I think both projects...
It's an ordinary you don't often see, which is terrible.
I think that's why it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I just wondered, my question was, I think, what's your responses to Catherine Slesser's assertion?
I mean, it wasn't directed at me, but I suppose I could pick up on it. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you have to visit a building to understand it. I think it's very easy to judge a project by photographs or from you know, media, and of course, you know, most often you have no other choice. But you know, I mean, we do what we do, and we care about what we do, and you can't really pay much attention to, you know, what people say about what you do.
It's a good question whether it's a criticism or not, because
I was going to
go on, Alex.
Is this a compliment? I don't know. I mean, it's like the wonderful everyday, isn't it? I think that the good architecture has to be experienced. And I was really struck by Armstrong, one of the judges, Armstrong Yakubi's comments when he visited. He said visited the John Morden Centre. He said the photos don't do it justice. And when you're there, it's a very dynamic series of spaces. And for me, it has all the qualities of more avant-garde, more expressive, more kind of image-grabbing architecture. But you have to be in the space to kind of appreciate that. So
you haven't got any silver, I mean, you haven't got any silver-coloured stuff.
No, I mean, it hasn't got any bling.
Bling, oh, okay.
And it's perhaps not sensational, but I think it still has the qualities of extraordinary architecture, or what we would.
Well, didn't Terry Farrell say that, you know, there should be more of this ordinary good embedded in society, and that's how people actually get to experience good architecture, and they commission architects and they enjoy good design.
Yeah. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about materials. There's a good question from the audience. I'm not sure either of these two can actually answer it, but let's see. What is your forecast for mass timber in the UK? Maybe, Alex, you're using that?
Yes, it just has to grow. It has to increase as a means of building. We don't have a choice. We are falling short of meeting our carbon budget, and timber and regenerative materials are an obvious way of reducing the carbon in buildings. That said, there is a lot that needs to change for that to happen. So I mentioned that most of our work is in housing. In London, there is any public sector housing scheme will not get funding if it's using timber in its construction. So there has to be a better understanding of its risks in order to get buy-in and support from funders. I think that is changing. The Wall Thistleton have done work with, I believe.
I mean, I don't understand why there isn't more test data. Not that you can always rely on test data, as we've seen, but that seems to be a very big area that's missing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's changing. And
have you looked at using that, Conrad?
Yeah, I have. I think there's a cultural component as well. I'm from Canada, so timber is very, you know, normal and everyday to us. But there's a kind of aversion to it here. It's seen as, and that actually.
Everyone learns about the Fire of London. That's like the first thing you learn.
But Morden College, 300 years old, is timber construction.
Well, that's the thing.
That's
It's
what Ren was doing.
quite often you're up against planning constraints where you're proposing a timber building and you'll be asked, even if it is timber construction, to just clad it in brick so that it kind of is appropriate and fits in with the surrounding. But what people fail to remember is that even 100 years ago, there were, well, maybe a bit more, but there were many kind of lean-tos, many informal timber structures. It is a part of the vernacular of the historic architecture of London.
But the other thing to remember, I suppose, is that Grenfell wasn't a timber building. It was a concrete and plastic building. So I don't know why planners go after timber. I've no idea.
Just an awareness of fire, I guess. That might be a little bit thing. But yeah, I agree. Anyway. If I have missed your question, I really apologise. I'm trying to kind of keep up on the iPad and on here. So it is possible that I occasionally miss ones. But some of them I'm going to come back to because they fit in better lower down. Let's talk about procurement. I think you had a question about that, Sumita, did you?
Yes. I think, what I wanted to really ask about was these kind of buildings, which I called buildings with heart and soul. And how to, as both of you run small practices, how do you actually go about procuring them? Did you know the clients? Did you get friends with them? And how long did it take? How long did this whole process take to getting to commissioning?
Oh, so not just procurement of the build.
Sorry, can you just clarify that? Which bit of procurement do you mean?
Well, just getting the contract, to
as an architect.
As an architect, yeah.
Getting the job, okay.
Yeah.
So in our case, Morden College, David Rutherford Jones ran an invited competition, 5 or 6 architects, I believe, and it was largely an interview with some very high-level concepts, but more a sort of series of questions about how we would respond to their brief, and not necessarily in a design solutions way. And David was clear that he selected us because we came across as someone who understood their needs and the residents' needs more specifically. How did we even get onto the shortlist? Well, we'd built up a reputation in later living schemes and had been working on a care home down in Southwark, and the project manager for that referred us to Morden College. So through that connection. I mean, more typically, most of our work is coming through the hard graft of public procurement, which is not an easy avenue to navigate.
You mean like getting on the framework and all that?
Yeah, and open tenders, and yeah, it's a nightmare, actually. and to your point about how you then get that quality, I think the problem with a lot of public procurement, it isn't outcome focused. It's not about what are the best design solutions for this project. It's about how are you going to manage risk for that client, or ensure it's on time and on budget, or how can you demonstrate that you've done 10 of these before in this location of this size to this budget. It's quite absurd, our procurement system.
Conrad, just tell us it was nice and easy. You met Emmanuel down the pub and
well,
really got on.
It was through, we were put in touch through mutual contact, and it was actually, there was a kind of job posting for a project manager. I met the client with a very disappointing project budget and timeline that shattered, the perception of how easy it would be to build this home. So it was in some ways a difficult first meeting, but I think that helped to kind of set the conversation, and from there, I suppose, I was able to have discussions about, the role of an architect and what we do, which I think is just really poorly understood, by most people. And so, I remember there being a moment where I said something to the effect of like, well, we also do interiors. Like that's also architecture to do the interior of a building. And so, it kind of just grew from.
That's
from
lucky, as the kind of shell was sort of originally there, even though you did a lot to it.
Yeah, exactly. So no, it evolved as a relationship, and we've, I guess, just reflecting a little bit on the role of an architect, there have been moments where we've been able to do some kind of joint consulting with other providers to share our story, what we've done with the home, and are taking those conversations forward. Meeting with people in the public sector to show a kind of another way.
Are you on a framework? I just need to know that.
I'm not. No.
Okay, so we've got a question from Ibby. This is a tips question. I love tips questions because you should have bullet point answers. Do. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. I wanted to find out. Sorry, I wanted to find out in regards to freelancers. Do you have any tips in terms of getting work in the public sector, both for elderly and young people?
So when you're saying freelancers, do you mean an individual freelance architect finding work in that, not in the form of a practice, but going to find a practice who might want you? Not you particularly, necessarily.
Both, actually, going to find the practice, or even if you could go to that, like the council and, find a position that you could help with. Because I know that there's a lot of freelancers out there who would, who would be geared to do projects like this, but how do you get in if you don't already have a team and you're used to working as a freelancer, but are ready to be a part of one?
Have you got an insight into that, Alex?
A bit, perhaps not specifically freelancers, but certainly small or even single person practices. When we started up, we collaborated a lot, and we still do, and it's really helped us sort of step up in terms of the scale of our work and the opportunities we're exposed to. So we reached out to larger practices and said, how about teaming up on these bids? And they see value in that because they're sort of sharing some of the burden, the responsibility. They can spread resourcing. The client sees value in that because they, especially on big housing schemes, which you do, there's diversity of kind of thought and ideas. So that's one element of small individual practitioners if they're wanting to do their own work. The other element of sort of freelance work, I think, is in the public sector is through initiatives like Public Practice, where, if you don't know, they're a brilliant organisation run by Pooja Agrawal, who has, they basically work with local authorities and bring in or second in architects to support and work within councils very directly. That might not be on commissions as such, but it might be helping their development teams collate briefs or inspire them about design or help facilitate design reviews. And I know many who are on that who are public practice associates, and they love it.
Yeah. You're nodding. We've got some good questions here which sort of take us a little bit back in time rather than to the what is architecture, what's next for architecture. So I'm just going to sort of dive back in the process a little bit. Did somebody want to voice the one about planning consent? So did you have difficulty dealing with planning consent, Conrad?
Planning is a huge challenge for children's homes, generally speaking. Unless you find a property that is already C2 listed, so within the use class of a residential institution. Unfortunately, there are very few of those properties. So we were very lucky in the case of Lighthouse that we didn't need to have planning consent for a change of use, which is normally the most difficult aspect of building a home, children's home. So
and that's because people don't really want a children's home there, or because the planners have some sort of zoning objection?
It has a few different, I can answer that in a couple of different ways. Yes, definitely, it's a kind of not in my backyard sort of problem that happens. And that can get very, very political very quickly, especially because these are often bigger homes in neighborhoods that have often a kind of more hostile attitude towards a different demographic, perhaps being in their neighborhood. But then, I think, I don't know. I think that things need to change on that front. It has to be easier. There's a shortage of children's care homes in London in particular, and
I think when I came round, you were telling me about children being removed from their local borough or even London to find a place somewhere on the coast, in Wales, something like that.
Yeah, sometimes the other end of the country. And so that's a huge problem, but also there's an issue with the risks associated with planning and the funding that charities need to, like, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. If you're looking to buy a property so that you can get planning to have a change of use, but your funder is unsure of whether or not you're going to be granted that change of use. So it's a huge limiting factor, basically.
Yeah. You must have had it easy, Alex. I mean, you're kind of next door to the main thing.
Well, except that makes it come under a lot more scrutiny because of the heritage aspect. Were you talking about in terms of my connections with?
No, I was talking about whether it's a problem getting planning, which was on that particular project. I meant the main thing as in being part of the existing John Morden Centre.
Oh, I thought you meant part of the Institute of Planning.
Oh, I am a planner, but, obviously,
no,
you know what you're doing because you know about planning.
That doesn't do me any favours. It got support. So we did consultation, local amenity societies, Blackheath, really supportive of the scheme, and other stakeholders. So there wasn't any great contention in planning, but it was unbelievably slow for a relatively small building that is out of sight. You can't see it from anywhere. It has no impact on the sort of wider urbanism. So it's hard to kind of understand why our planning system does tend towards
entropy.
Entropy, what a good word. Yeah,
lovely
absolutely. Word. So yeah, that was the only sort of barrier really, just the sort of, it was very hard to kind of keep it on track program-wise.
I'm just going to give you all a warning now. We've got 7 minutes. So if you did want to put your hand up at all, you're going to have to do it in the next 5. I'm not expecting it because I'm getting lots of great questions, but, oh, there's one there. Okay, yes.
Hello. Well, firstly, congratulations. They're both wonderful schemes, and it's wonderful to see the passion that you've put into it and the commitment. I've really got a couple of questions, if I can quickly put them in. First thing is that your comment about having arts and health. Actually, there's a precedent of the Finsbury Health Centres.
Yes.
And
how about the nail bar?
And well, I think the Finsbury Health Centre was looking at fleas and all sorts of other things as well. But the Peckham Centre again, and that really points to or emphasises the point that we are human beings and we need more than rabbit hutches. And of course, as architects, we are planning a lifestyle. We're not just doing a structure. But I'm very interested in the use of CLT on the roofs that you did. And I wondered if you could just elaborate how you got Part L on that and how the roofs work structurally. Because you had a lovely detail at the end where you've got the glazing and it just looks like, you've just got the flashing. Of course, you've got the insulation and everything else behind it. But it's very effective and it looks really beautiful. But I'd really like to find out what is behind it and how the roof works structurally.
This may have to come back to a drawing that you share together. But
yes.
Go on, see what you can do.
Well, actually, there was a technical drawing I showed. Well, a sketch rather.
Is it not possible to bring back the site?
I think we're not going to do that now.
No.
But
okay.
I think, so I won't be able to answer your question in full, certainly not the U values, because my project architect would have his head right in that space much better than I. Although we obviously do pay very close attention to thermal bridging and ensuring we're designing out any cold bridges and the like. The structure, though, is really simple, and this comes back to the sort of related question of cost. There are no expensive trusses in the building. They're just big, flat triangular plates of CLT that lean against each other, and the walls act as stabilizers and sort of like a ring beam. So the beauty of CLT, it's like when you're a student making a model out of balsa wood. It's like an exaggerated or scaled up balsa wood model, and I think that's why I like working with the material. So in terms of the actual structural design, we worked with Mike Haddy Associates, who are very well versed in timber construction. We also, before tender stage 3, had eUrban on, who are the specialists in CLT. There are a number of KLH and others who do it, but eUrban sort of were at the forefront of doing CLT construction in the UK.
Never known how to say that before. eUrban.
Is that-
I always thought, no, I don't know. I don't know.
Urban, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, they were brilliant from the outset. So we had that technical input from them, even before planning.
It looks magical. I mean, to make it work like that, it's really fun. And the second question I had was, actually, it relates to both schemes, is the business about safeguarding. Because if you've got the doctor's practice and it all looked very open, and with your children's home, I was just wondering how the children related to the external environment, because obviously being outside is really important as well.
So hold on, how's that related to safeguarding?
Well, about strangers coming on site. How do you control, and how can children also be outside?
So how are you controlling the external spaces?
Yeah, I mean, one of the aspects of the property that appealed was that it's a little bit set back from the street. So there was a little bit of a buffer zone. And it meant that there's, already to enter the property as a stranger, there's a kind of awkwardness to that. If you're a visitor, then the intention is that you feel welcomed if you're meant to be there. And but there is, we created an opening in the entrance, a beautiful kind of arts and crafts brick entrance, and we created an opening with a window to the office, so that there could be, we didn't want it to just be a kind of intercom, a faceless sort of experience of arriving. So, and the principle, and this comes more down to the way that the home is run, but the principle is that someone always comes to let you in rather than it just being kind of buzzer. So that has a bit less to do with safeguarding, but also the principle of the home is that again, it was very much about it not being a kind of oppressive space that was closing the children in. If they want to leave, they can. They're human beings with freedom, and so the safeguarding then has much less to do with the architecture and much more to do with the way that the house is run, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks. We just want to talk to you a little bit about education, because you've both, I don't know if you still teach, Alex, but you both taught or do teach. Sumita, I know you had a couple of questions on this. Can you just do one of them?
I think, I'm going to combine the two, actually. But I know that Alex was teaching at London Met, where I used to teach as well, and you're at the University of Cambridge still teaching. So both of you got your foot in education, and it's really important we have all the young people here. So looking into the future, let's see if I can do a good job of combining the two questions. So the first aspect of the question was that, things like daycare centres, community centres, children's centres, homes are not addressed within the curriculum. So how are you sort of getting young people enthusiastic about such building typologies? And I also wanted to know about leadership and soft skills that went into sort of, you got into actual building and managing the project, but the soft skills were really important in how you built it. And these are things that are not actually taught at schools of architecture. So how are you as teachers, how are you bringing that?
Could you just answer half of that, which is, could you answer the project types and how they can be brought into education? And maybe, Alex, you can follow on with a bit about soft skills and where they fit into education. So Conrad first on project types.
So the course that I teach on, the students actually bring their own research topics to us, and we facilitate that research through our own research, design research methodologies. And there's an awful lot of interest into these issues, actually. A lot of students also looking at an aging population, and in some parts of the world, shrinking cities as a result of that. I mean, I do think there's actually an enormous interest. at least in my experience with these kinds of projects. But at the same time, I think more important than teaching a kind of typology is an attitude, a kind of generosity, an ability to be empathetic, to listen, and to really be attentive to the needs of each project, whatever that might be, because it's unlikely that most students don't get to build a project that they work on, and so if they have the right attitude, though, that can be applicable to any range of projects.
Well, we've definitely touched on soft skills there. Alex, have you got more to add on that?
Well, actually, I was going to try and answer the two questions in one, and it picks up that point about trying to help students appreciate their social responsibility as architects, and the fact that any building we design, whatever the type, has an impact on people's quality of life, even to the passerby, in terms of their sense of security or whether they feel comfortable in that environment or how they identify with that building, but obviously more impact on those who actually use the buildings. So I suppose we try and always, we give our students very real briefs, often related to things we're exploring in the practice, so that they're not abstract, they're not divorced from potentially either social structures or kind of communities or neighbourhoods that the students might be familiar with, and we'll do a lot of precedent studies, go out and see projects, but also try and have a diversity of voices in crits and come in, and that could be clients coming in to share their opinion on the students' work.
So we haven't got on to what's next in architecture in terms of a question, but I feel like these two have actually answered that in talking about education, but perhaps also in their buildings. So I wanted to finish off with a big thanks to our sponsors, to Autodesk for sponsoring the Stirling Prize, and Marco Goldschmidt Foundation for the Stephen Lawrence Prize. And thanks to you, the audience. Really enjoyed your questions. I mean, I'm kind of annoyed because I didn't get many of mine in the end, but they were really good and really spoke to some of the deep issues in this. And finally, a big thanks to Alex and Conrad, prize-winning architects, both of them, and well-deserved.